A virgin Apache girl running barefoot through a blizzard with her grandmother's last words burning in her ears. Behind her, everything she ever loved was on fire. Ahead of her, a cabin built by giants. Three mountain men. Three strangers who had no reason to save her. But they opened the door, and what happened next would bind four hearts together for the rest of their lives. This is the story of the virgin bride of three mountain men. She ran, not the way a woman runs when she is late or frightened by a shadow. Wren Blackwood ran the way a creature runs when death is close enough to taste, barefoot through snow that reached her shins, lungs burning with air so cold it felt like swallowing broken glass, blood from the cut on her forehead mixing with snowflakes and freezing against her skin in thin red lines that made her look like something painted for war. Behind her, the sky was wrong, orange where it should have been black, the color of her grandmother's home burning. The color of everything she had ever known turning to ash and smoke and nothing. She could still hear the gunshots, faint now muffled by distance and the howling wind that tore through the pines like a living thing but still there, still real. And between the gunshots, the sound of cattle being driven through the cornfields, hooves crushing the last harvest. The old cruel trick that Garrett Nash used when he wanted Apache people to understand that their land was no longer their land, that their lives were no longer their lives. But tonight, Nash wanted more than land. Tonight, Nash wanted her. 2 weeks ago, he had ridden into the settlement with 6 men behind him. Fine vest, expensive hat, smile like a knife wrapped in silk. He told the tribal elder he wanted to marry Wren, called it a peace marriage, said it would protect the settlement from removal from the soldiers from the inevitable march of progress that swallowed native land the way rivers swallow stones. The elder, 70 years old and sick with the cough that would not leave his chest, had refused. Wren is the healing spirit, he said. She belongs to no man. She belongs to the people. Nash laughed, that cold sound like metal striking metal. Everything belongs to someone, old man, this girl included. The only question is whether you want me to ask politely or whether you want me to take what I want. 2 weeks later, his answer came in fire and bullets. Wren's grandmother, Nana, had pushed her out the back of the lodge when the first shot split the night. 75 years old bones, thin as bird wings, but her grip on Wren's arm was iron. She shoved the leather medicine bag into Wren's hands, the bag that held everything: dried herbs, birthing tools, the handwritten journal of plant remedies passed down through 4 generations of Apache healers. Go up, child. Nana's voice urgent but steady, the voice of a woman who had survived worse than this and knew exactly what survival cost. Climb high. Find the men on the mountain. They live like bears, but they do not kill the innocent. I have heard the hunters speak of them. Go now. Do not look back. Do not ever look back. Wren did not want to leave. She would have stayed and burned with her grandmother if Nana had let her. But the old woman shoved her with the last strength in her brittle arms, and Wren stumbled into the darkness. And then she was running. Running with tears freezing on her cheeks. Running with the medicine bag bouncing against her spine. Running with the taste of smoke in her throat and the sound of her grandmother's voice fading behind her like a song carried away by wind. She ran all night, up, always up, through passes that even Apache hunters rarely used because the footing was treacherous and the mountain lions denned in the rocks above. The blizzard covered her tracks, which was mercy. But the blizzard also tried to kill her, which was the mountain's way of reminding her that mercy always comes with a price. The temperature dropped until her skin went from brown to purple. Her moccasins, already torn from the rocks, offered nothing against the snow. Her fingers stopped hurting, which she knew from Nana's teaching was the most dangerous sign of all. When the pain stops, the dying starts. Dawn came gray and reluctant, as if even the sun was afraid of what the day would bring. Snow still falling thick, wind still screaming, and through the white curtain of the blizzard, Wren saw it. A cabin, not a small cabin, a fortress of logs, each one thick as a man's body, stacked and notched with the precision of someone who understood that on this mountain sloppy construction meant death. The roof pitched steep so snow would slide off instead of collapsing it, smoke curling from a stone chimney. Firelight flickering behind a window made of actual glass, which meant whoever lived here had either money or extraordinary skill in trade. Around the cabin, a fence of split rails, a rack for drying animal hides, a woodpile stacked higher than Wren's head, which told her that whoever lived here planned for long winters and planned well. Everything about this place spoke of size. The door was taller than any door she had ever seen. The axe, embedded in the chopping block, had a handle as long as her arm. This was a place built by giants. Wren collapsed on the porch. Her knees hit wood. The world tilted sideways, went gray at the edges, started to dissolve. She lifted her fist, tried to knock. Her hand connected with the oak door, once a sound so weak that the wind should have swallowed it entirely, and then she fell forward, and the cold took her, and everything went dark. The last thing she heard before consciousness left was the sound of the door opening. Heavy boots on wood planks, and a voice so deep it seemed to come from the mountain itself. "Good Lord, Boone Heat, Winter, Colt, get the blankets. Move now." Then arms lifted her, arms so large that she felt like a child being carried. Heat against her frozen skin, the smell of wood smoke and pine resin, and something that might have been venison stew, and then nothing. Silas Drummond had not slept deeply in 15 years. The mountain taught you that lesson early, and it only had to teach it once. Deep sleepers died. Grizzlies came in the night. Wolves circled the fence when the snow got bad enough. Avalanches gave no warning except a sound like God clearing his throat, and by the time you heard it, you were already buried. So when the knock came at dawn, faint as a bird striking glass, Silas was awake instantly. He crossed the cabin in 4 strides, which was 2 fewer than it took most men, because Silas Drummond was 6 feet and 5 inches of muscle built by 15 years of felling trees, hauling stone, and living a life that did not forgive weakness. He opened the door and found her. A girl, small, impossibly small compared to everything in his world. Curled on the porch like a wounded animal skin, the color of copper gone wrong with cold blood, dried dark on her forehead, lips blue, whole body shaking with tremors that she could not control even in unconsciousness. A leather bag on her back soaked through with snow, black lashes trembling against cheeks that should have been warm and brown, but were instead the color of bruises. Silas had seen many things in his life. He had faced down a grizzly with nothing but an axe and his willingness to die before backing up. He had survived blizzards that lasted a week. He had once pulled Boone from a river so cold that ice had formed on Boone's eyebrows before Silas could drag him to shore. But the sight of this small Apache girl lying crumpled on his porch, nearly dead from cold, her frozen fingers still curled around the strap of her medicine bag, as if whatever was inside mattered more than her own survival, made something in his chest crack. Something he had believed was stone, something he had counted on being stone. He picked her up. She weighed nothing, less than a yearling deer, less than the mox he carried, one in each hand without thinking about it. She was so light that for a terrible moment he thought she might already be dead, and his heart lurched in a way that frightened him because hearts were not supposed to lurch for strangers. Then she exhaled against his neck, a small broken breath, warm enough to prove that life was still in her. Boone Harlan and Colt Weston were awake before Silas made it to the fireplace. 3 men who have lived together long enough, become one organism with 6 ears, and the sound of Silas moving fast meant something was wrong. Silas never moved fast unless something was very wrong. "Apache girl," Silas said, laying her on the bearskin rug before the hearth. Words clipped efficient, no room for questions. Near frozen. Boone warm water, not hot. Colt the sheep, wool blankets, the thick ones. And nobody touch her too suddenly. You warm a hypothermia case too fast, and you kill them. The heart stops. Boone jumped. 28 years old, red-brown hair wild from sleep. Green eyes instantly alert. He had water heating in under a minute, brewed a tea from wild mint that he kept dried above the stove, and prepared warm cloths with the speed of a man who had learned in orphanages that being useful was the only way to guarantee being kept. Colt moved slower. He always moved slower in the mornings because the old wound in his right thigh stiffened overnight, a souvenir from a bullet that had hit him 3 inches from the femoral artery during a border skirmish 6 years ago. The military surgeon who stitched him up had been drunk and in a hurry, and the wound had healed wrong, leaving a scar that ached in cold weather like a prophecy of pain that never quite came true. But slow or not, Colt brought the heaviest wool blankets they owned and wrapped them around the girl with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who only knew him by his size. 6 feet 6 inches, shoulders wide enough to block a doorway, hands the size of dinner plates. A man built for violence who had sworn off violence and come to the mountain to find peace. Three giant men kneeling around one small girl, trying to keep her alive. The scene, if anyone had been there to witness it, would have been equal parts strange and beautiful. Ren woke 2 hours later. The first thing she saw was three faces looking down at her. Three enormous faces, bearded, worried, so close that she could see the different colors of their eyes. Black, green, storm gray. Every instinct she had screamed at her. Danger, strange men, run. But her body refused to obey. She was too weak to move, too weak to do anything except lie on the bearskin rug and stare up at these men, who were so large they made the cabin around them seem like a dollhouse. "You are safe," the dark-haired one said. His voice was low and slow, the way you speak to a spooked horse, and Ren hated that she found it comforting. "No one here will hurt you. Can you tell us what happened?" She opened her mouth. Words came out in a jumble of broken English and Apache. Nana. Fire. Nash. Horses. Guns. Running all night. Cold, so cold. Please help me. Please do not send me away. Three sets of eyes met above her. A conversation happened without words. The dark-haired one nodded. The red-haired one nodded. And then the largest one, the one with pale blonde hair and gray eyes, who moved like a man carrying invisible weight, spoke in Apache. His pronunciation was terrible. Halting, childlike. But the words were real. Safe, here. Safe. Ren's eyes went wide. She had never heard a white man speak her language. Not once in 24 years. The blonde man continued, switching back to English. "I lived near a Chiricahua Apache settlement for 2 years during my time in the Army. They taught me enough to know that you are carrying a medicine bag. A healer's bag. You are a healer." "Yes," Ren nodded. Tears she did not want spilled down her cheeks. "Then you came to the right place," the big man said. "Because my thigh here aches like a bear has been chewing on it every single morning, and these two make remedies so bad that I feel worse after drinking them than before." The red-haired one protested. "Excuse me, my peppermint tea is excellent." But the other two shook their heads simultaneously, and Ren, despite everything, despite being exhausted and terrified, and grieving and lying on the floor of a stranger's cabin, surrounded by men who could break her in half without trying, laughed. It was small, barely a sound, more breath than voice. But it was a laugh, and three men looked at her laughing the way men look at the sun coming out after a week of storms. The dark-haired one was Silas. The red-haired one was Boone. The giant blonde was Colt. She learned their names that first morning and filed them in the part of her brain that cataloged important things, the names of healing plants, the signs of changing weather, the sound of her grandmother's voice, and now these. Silas, Boone, Colt. Three names that felt heavy in her mouth. Three names she would carry for the rest of her life, though she did not know it yet. Ren stayed, not because she wanted to, because the mountain left her no choice. The blizzard continued for 3 more days. The trail down was buried under snow chest deep on a tall man waist deep on a giant. She did not know if anyone from her settlement had survived, did not know if Nash was searching for her. She only knew that these three enormous men had not harmed her, and that fact alone, for a girl who had been taught since birth that white men were the source of all danger, was a kind of miracle she did not have a name for. The first 3 days, Ren watched more than she spoke. She sat wrapped in the sheep wool blanket on the bearskin rug before the fire, her black eyes following every movement the three men made. She studied them the way she studied plants in the forest, carefully, thoroughly, looking for what was hidden beneath the surface. She watched Silas. He woke before dawn every morning when the sky outside was still black and the cold pressed against the window glass like something trying to get in. He built the fire, heated water, then sat and carved wood in silence. Small pieces that became spoons bowls, once a tiny bird, so delicate that Ren could see individual feathers etched into the grain. His hands were as large as her head, but they moved with a precision that made her chest ache with something she could not identify. He rarely spoke. Sometimes she forgot he was in the room until he placed a bowl of hot porridge in front of her, without a word, nodded once and turned away. She watched Boone. He was the opposite of Silas in nearly every way. Always talking, always laughing, always moving as if stillness were a kind of death he was determined to outrun. He told stories about growing up in an orphanage in Tennessee with a delivery that made them sound hilarious, and it took Ren several days to realize that the stories were actually heartbreaking. That Boone had learned to make people laugh because the alternative was letting them see how much he hurt. He cooked with a passion that bordered on obsession. Every meal a new experiment, and he always pushed the best portion toward Ren with that wide grin. Try it. If it is terrible, throw it in my face. Silas already has, so I'm used to it. She watched Colt. He frightened her the most, not because he was cruel, but because he was enormous and quiet in a way that was different from Silas. Silas was quiet because he had nothing to say. Colt was quiet because he was watching everything at once. His gray eyes swept the room constantly, assessing threat, even when there was no threat to assess. But when those eyes landed on Ren, they softened. And when his thigh hurt, she noticed because she was a healer, and healers see pain the way most people see color. He clenched his jaw and bore it in silence rather than complain. By the fourth day, the blizzard stopped. Light poured through the cabin windows, and Ren saw the three men clearly in daylight for the first time. She realized she had underestimated their actual size. Inside the cabin, despite the cabin being large by any standard, they had to duck through doorways. Their shoulders nearly touched both walls in the narrow hallway between rooms. The dining table Silas had built looked normal-sized until Ren sat at it and realized her feet did not reach the floor. She was a small creature among giants. And instead of fear, she felt strangely, impossibly safe, because these giants behaved around her as if she were the most precious thing that had ever entered their home. They lowered their voices when she was near. They moved more slowly so they would not startle her. They never blocked the exit, always left her a clear path to the door, as if they understood the wild animal instinct in her that needed to know she could run at any moment. On the fifth night, Ren heard Colt groan, soft, almost inaudible. But the healer in her did not allow sleep when someone nearby was in pain. She found him sitting before the dying fire, hand clamped on his right thigh, face twisted in the orange glow of embers. He saw her, standing in the doorway, small in the oversized shirt of Boone's that she wore to sleep, the fabric hanging to her knees. He immediately released his thigh and straightened his back. "Sorry I woke you, just the old wound." "It is nothing," lying Ren said. She stepped forward. This was territory she understood. Sickness, pain, healing. Here she was not the small girl among giants. Here she was, the medicine woman, and he was the patient. "Let me see." Colt hesitated. The wound was on his thigh. Showing it meant pulling up his trouser leg, meant letting her close, meant letting her touch him. And all three of them knew, because Ren had told them during one of the first cautious conversations around the fire, that she had never been touched by a man. Never. The settlement had designated her as the healing spirit since she was 12 years old, and the healing spirit was sacred, untouchable, belonging to no one. "I am a healer," Ren said, and her voice was steadier than it had been at any point since she arrived. "This is what I was born to do. Let me see." Colt pulled the fabric up. The scar was long, ugly, crossing from outer thigh to just above the knee. A wound that had been stitched in haste and healed badly. The muscle around it was tight, swollen from the cold. Ren opened the medicine bag. Nana's bag. Her hands moved by instinct, finding the jar of arnica oil, the packet of dried sage, the small bundle of natural camphor. She mixed them in her palm with bear grease from Silas's stores, creating a salve that warmed on contact. "This will feel hot," she warned. Then she placed her hands on Colt's thigh. This was the first time Ren Blackwood touched a man. Her hands small and brown and warm on his skin, broad and pale and burning even in the cold night. She felt the muscle coil beneath her fingers, felt the power held in check, felt the pulse of blood under her fingertips. She felt Colt stop breathing. His entire massive body went perfectly, completely still, as if he was afraid that any movement would make her pull away. She worked the salve in with firm professional strokes. But inside her, everything was shaking. His skin under her hands, the heat radiating from him, the way he looked at her gray storm eyes, now soft as morning fog, as if she were performing a miracle, instead of simply applying medicine. "You have extraordinary hands," Colt said quietly. His voice was rougher than usual. "My grandmother said I was born with healing hands." Ren did not look up. She concentrated on the work. "Your grandmother was right." Silence stretched between them, only the fire crackling and the wind outside. Then Colt spoke again, so softly it was almost a whisper. "Thank you, Ren." Not just for the medicine. For touching me. I know that was not easy for you. Ren stopped, looked up at him. In the firelight, his face, usually hard as granite, looked unexpectedly vulnerable. And she realized something: he was lonely too. All three of them were lonely. Three giants living on top of a mountain, avoiding the world, having only each other. Just like her. Except instead of one lonely person, they were three lonely people together. Not as hard as I thought it would be, Ren admitted. I expected to be afraid when I touched a man. But I am not afraid. Not of you, that moment. Ren looking up at Colt in the firelight, her hand still resting on his thigh. Both of them recognizing that something had shifted between them, something fundamental and irreversible. It would become a memory they both carried forever. But they did not know that Silas and Boone were also awake, also listening through the thin wall, and that both of them felt their own hearts crack open in exactly the same way. In the second week, the snow melted enough for Silas to make the journey down the mountain to the town of Copper Ridge for supplies. He returned with a face more serious than usual, which for Silas was saying something, because Silas's default expression already looked like he was contemplating the fundamental injustice of the universe. Bad news, Silas said. The four of them sat around the dinner table. Ren in the chair Silas had quietly modified by adding a thick cushion so her feet almost reached the floor, which she pretended not to notice and he pretended not to have done. Nash is telling the whole town there is an Apache girl who ran away from her settlement. He is saying she was promised to him and she fled. He has posted a bounty, $50 for anyone who finds her and delivers her to his ranch. Silence, heavy as stone. Ren felt the blood drain from her face. $50 was a fortune for the working people of Copper Ridge. Someone would search. Someone would sell her. He is lying, Ren said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with a fury that made her look for a moment far older and far more dangerous than her 24 years. I was not promised to anyone. My people refused him. He burned our homes because he was refused. I know, Silas said, but Nash has money power and Sheriff Hobbs in his pocket. Your word and Apache Girl's word against the richest man in the territory, the town will believe him. Boone, who was always smiling, was not smiling now. He placed his fist on the table, gently but firmly enough to make the plates rattle. Then she stays here, with us. Nash wants to come up here and look. Let him try. Colt nodded slowly, gray eyes going cold in a way that reminded Ren he had once been a soldier. I know men like Nash, met plenty of them in the army. They take whatever they want and call it their right. This girl is not his property. She is not anyone's property. Silas looked at Ren. Do you want to stay? And Ren looked at three men, three strangers who had warmed her, fed her, given her space, asked nothing in return. Three men who were now offering to stand between her and the most powerful man in the territory. For her, a nameless, orphaned Apache girl with nothing but a medicine bag and the clothes on her back. For the first time in 24 years, she felt she had a choice. Not the settlement choosing for her, not Nash choosing for her. She was choosing. I want to stay, she said, but I will not be a burden. I can help. I know healing plants on this mountain better than anyone alive. I can grow herbs. I can deliver babies for women in the town if needed. I can treat injuries and sickness. Let me stay and I will earn my place. You do not need to earn anything to stay here, Boone said softly. And so the arrangement was made. Ren would live in the cabin. She would be the healer. They would be her protectors. A practical agreement. Nothing more. No one mentioned feelings. No one mentioned that Ren was a virgin who had never been touched, living in the same cabin as three men who had not been close to a woman in years. No one mentioned the way hearts beat faster when certain people stood too near. Not yet. But that night, lying on the small bed that Silas had built for her, exactly her size in the room that had been their storage room until they cleared it without being asked, Ren knew something she was not ready to say out loud. She had not chosen to stay only because of safety. She had stayed because, for the first time in 24 years, she did not want to be alone. And that truth both terrified her and made her smile in the darkness. The weeks turned, third week into the fourth into the fifth into the sixth. Winter held the mountain in its grip, and inside the cabin, four people who had been strangers learned each other the way you learn a landscape. Slowly, thoroughly, with constant small discoveries. Ren discovered that each man touched her differently. Silas touched her through deliberate accidents, his large hand resting briefly on her back as he passed her in the narrow mountain way, his fingers brushing hers when he handed her a bowl of food. Each contact sent heat radiating from the point of touch through her entire body. She realized that Silas expressed affection through food. Every meal was a quiet declaration. He remembered what she liked, what she did not, what made her wrinkle her nose. He woke earlier than his already early normal, just to brew her tea at the exact temperature she preferred. Boone touched her with uncontainable enthusiasm, an arm around her shoulders when telling a story, his hand grabbing hers to pull her outside to check the animal traps, his fingers reaching for her hair with unconcealed admiration. "Your hair is beautiful, like a black river." Boone did not know how to hide emotion. Everything showed on his face. When he looked at Wren, his green eyes lit up like spring meadows and she felt worshipped. Colt touched her least of all, but every touch carried the weight of the whole world, his finger lifting a dry leaf from her hair, his hand steadying her elbow when she slipped on ice. And every evening when Wren applied medicine to his thigh, the ritual that had become habit, the silence between them grew thicker, hotter, more charged with meaning. Wren had never known her body could feel these things. 24 years as the healing spirit, forbidden to love, forbidden to want, forbidden to feel skin burn. When someone stood too close, had convinced her that that part of her did not exist. Now it was waking up, fiercely, demandingly, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with it. One night she dreamed of them, all three. In the dream they were touching her. Silas kissing her neck, Boone holding her hand, Colt's arms around her from behind. She woke in darkness, heart hammering, skin-burning breath ragged. The sensation between her thighs, wet and pulsing, was something she had never experienced and did not have a name for. She lay in the dark, ashamed and wild, and for the first time in her life, whispered the words aloud. "I want, but want what? Want who?" All three was that madness. Before she could begin to answer those questions, the outside world forced its way back in. It was late in the 6th week. The snow had retreated enough to make the trail passable, and Wren was in the cabin with Colt while Silas and Boone were hunting. The afternoon light was gold and slanted through the window when the sound of hooves broke the mountain silence. 4 riders. The one in front had a rat face and a nervous horse. Roy, one of Nash's hired men. Behind him, 3 more, all armed. Colt went outside. He stood on the porch, filling the doorway. He did not carry a weapon. At 6'6", with shoulders that blocked the light and a face that suggested he had seen enough violence to be entirely unimpressed by the threat of more, he did not need one. "Mr. Nash sends his regards," Roy said, squinting past Colt toward the cabin. "Heard there is an Apache girl up here. Mr. Nash wants her brought to his ranch, says she belongs to him." "No girl here belongs to anyone," Colt said. His voice was calm in a way that was more frightening than shouting. "And if Nash wants something, he can climb up here and ask me himself. I do not speak to dogs." Roy's face went red. His hand drifted toward his holster. A rifle shot cracked through the air. One shot, precise. Roy's hat flew off his head and landed in the snow behind his horse. The horse reared. Roy grabbed the saddle horn with both hands. Silas stepped out of the tree line, rifle still shouldered, black eyes cold as the stone beneath the snow. Boone emerged from the opposite direction. Splitting axe in one hand, the perpetual smile completely absent from his face for the first time Wren could remember. 3 mountain men, 3 giants. One with a rifle, one with an axe, one standing like a wall of flesh before the door. 4 of Nash's hired men looked at each other and understood that this was not a fight they were going to win. "Not today, not any day. Tell Nash," Silas said, lowering the rifle but not putting it away, "that this girl is here by her own choice. She is not property. Next time he sends men up here, I will not aim for the hat." Roy and his men retreated down the trail. Everyone knew this was not the end. Nash was not a man who accepted refusal. But when they disappeared below the tree line, Wren stepped out of the cabin. She had watched everything through the window, and instead of the fear she expected to feel, something else burned in her chest, something fierce, something primal, something completely new. 3 men had just stood between her and danger without a moment of hesitation. 3 strangers, not her people, not her blood. They had been willing to fight, to kill, to die for her. For her, a nameless Apache orphan who owned nothing but a leather bag and borrowed clothes. She looked at Silas, who was checking his rifle with the calm expression of a man who had just swatted a fly. She looked at Boone, who was embedding his axe in a tree stump and wiping sweat from his forehead with a grin that was slowly, carefully returning. She looked at Colt, who was looking at her with eyes that asked only one thing, "Are you all right?" "Thank you," Wren said. Her voice shook, but her eyes were dry. She had cried enough. "No thanks needed," three voices said nearly in unison, and then all three looked at each other and, despite the gravity of what had just happened, laughed. And Wren laughed too. And in that moment, standing among three enormous men who were laughing in the yard of their cabin after a confrontation involving firearms, Wren Blackwood knew. She loved them, all three. Not a third of her heart for each. Her whole heart for all three. The only problem was she had absolutely no idea what to do with that love. And neither did they. Not yet. But the mountain was patient, and so was love. And winter was not over. And the cabin was small, and three men and one woman had many long nights ahead of them, trapped together by snow and silence, and the growing undeniable gravity of what was building between them. Something was coming. All four of them could feel it, the way animals feel storms before the sky changes color. Something that would change everything. Something that could not be stopped, only prepared for. And in the darkness of her small room that night, Wren Blackwood lay with her hand over her heart and whispered the names like a prayer she was still learning the words to. Silas, Boone, Colt, her giants, her protectors, her something, though she did not yet know what that something would become. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, and the mountain held its silence like a promise. Spring came to the mountain the way a held breath finally releases. Slow at first, then all at once. Snow pulling back from the meadows like a white tide retreating. Creeks unfreezing with sounds like bones cracking. Pine trees pushing out new growth so green it almost hurt to look at. And light everywhere, light pouring into the valley where the cabin stood as if the sun had been saving it all winter and was now spending it recklessly. Wren stepped onto the porch each morning and breathed air that smelled of wet earth and pine resin, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers pushing up through the last patches of snow. She felt her body waking with the season. Something inside her stretching, reaching, opening toward warmth, the way the mountain laurel opened toward the sun. After nearly 3 months of winter in the cabin, she had changed. Not in appearance, she was still small among giants, still brown-skinned and black-eyed and long-haired. But the way she moved through space was different. She no longer flinched when someone walked past. She no longer sat near the door with one ear tuned to escape. She had started calling the cabin home. First in her head, then occasionally out loud, a slip of the tongue that she did not correct, and every time the word left her mouth, three men tried to hide their smiles and none of them succeeded. But spring also brought something else. Space. His green eyes, usually bright with humor and mischief, were serious now. Deep. Full of things he wanted to say, and things he was afraid to say, and things he had never said to anyone because there had never been anyone to say them to. "Because you are the first person in my life whose hand I have wanted to hold," he said. "I grew up in that orphanage, Wren. Nobody held my hand when I was scared. Nobody held me when I was sad. I spent 28 years not knowing what another person's hand felt like when it held yours, because it wanted to and not because it had to." He breathed in. "Your hand fits inside mine, like it was made to be there. And I know that sounds crazy, but..." "Not crazy," Wren whispered. "I feel it too." Boone smiled. The widest, brightest, most radiant smile she had ever seen from a man who had an extensive collection of smiles, and he squeezed her hand tighter. They gathered herbs all afternoon, hand in hand. And when they returned to the cabin at dusk, both Silas and Colt looked at their clasped fingers, then looked at each other. Not angry, not jealous, not exactly, but there was something darker in their eyes, longing, want, and the fear that they were being left behind. That night, after Wren went to her room, three men sat around the fireplace. For the first time in 15 years of living together, the air between them was tense. Silas spoke first because Silas always cut to the bone. "She held your hand all afternoon." Not an accusation, a statement of fact. But his voice, usually level as still water, had a tremor in it that Wren would have recognized as pain if she had been listening. "She held my hand," Boone confirmed. He did not apologize and he did not boast. "And I will not lie to you, it was the best moment of my life." Colt sat rubbing his bad thigh, staring into the flames. His jaw was working the way it did when he was fighting something internal. Then he said the word none of them had been willing to say. I am jealous. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the cabin. Colt Weston, the man who controlled his emotions the way he controlled his hands, with absolute precision and iron will, had just admitted what all three of them felt. So am I, Silas said, and I hate myself for it. She is not a possession. She is not a prize for us to compete over. But we all want her, Boone said, blunt as always, because Boone believed that unspoken truths rotted inside a man the way unspoken pain rotted inside a wound. Do not pretend otherwise. I see how you look at her, Silas. Every morning when she comes out of her room, you forget to breathe. And Colt, every evening when she rubs that medicine into your leg, I think you are about to come apart. So what do we do? Colt asked. Fight each other, destroy 15 years of brotherhood over a woman. Not a woman, Silas said slowly. Wren. Her name hung in the air. Heavier than smoke, heavier than silence. Three men looked at each other and saw the truth reflected in each other's eyes. None of them was willing to give her up, but none of them was willing to lose the other two. Boone broke the deadlock because Boone was always the one brave enough to say what others feared. We have shared everything for 15 years. The cabin, food, work, danger. What is different if we share love too? Silence, but not the silence of rejection. The silence of men thinking hard about something they had never considered before. She is not an axe to pass around, Colt said, but his voice lacked genuine objection. No, Silas agreed. She is a person who decides for herself. The question is not whether we agree to share. The question is whether she wants all three of us, and whether we have the courage to ask. What if she chooses one? Boone asked, his voice going quiet. Then the other two congratulate him and keep living, Silas said. No jealousy, no anger. No destroying what we have built. Agreed, Colt and Boone said together. But if Boone said, hope burning visible in his green eyes, just if she wants all three, then we are the luckiest men on this mountain, Silas said. And for the first time during the conversation, he smiled. What none of them knew was that Wren was not asleep. She was lying in her room, ear pressed to the thin wooden wall, and she had heard everything. Every word, every pause, every crack in the voices of men who had faced grizzly bears without flinching, but who were terrified of losing each other over a girl who weighed less than a saddle. All three wanted her. All three were willing to step aside for the others. All three were hoping desperately that she would choose them all. Wren lay in the dark with her hand on her chest, feeling the wild drumbeat of her own heart. She was a virgin. She had never been kissed, had never been held in the way that lovers hold each other. And now three men were talking about loving her together at the same time, and instead of terror, she felt every cell in her body singing. She got up. She opened her door. She stepped out. Three heads turned. Three pairs of eyes went wide. Wren stood in the doorway of her room wearing the white sleep shirt that was actually Boone's old flannel, her black hair, loose bare feet on the wooden floor, dark eyes bright with firelight, and something that looked like the courage of a woman who has finally decided to stop being afraid. The walls are very thin, she said. I heard everything. Absolute stillness. Three giants looking like deer caught in lantern light. And my answer, Wren said, her voice trembling, but her eyes not leaving theirs, is all three. I want all three of you. The moment after Wren spoke those words, something in the room changed. Not gradually, all at once. Like the moment a dam breaks or the moment lightning decides where to strike. The tension that had been building for weeks, the accumulated weight of looks, held too long, and touches that lingered. And words left carefully unsaid, all of it shifted from potential to kinetic in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Three men stood simultaneously. Reflex, instinct. Then they stopped, glanced at each other, and in that glance there was a flash of awkwardness that would have been comical under any other circumstances. Three men who had faced down armed riders without blinking, who had survived blizzards and bear attacks, and the daily violence of mountain life, suddenly unsure of what to do with their hands. Silas moved first because Silas always led, but he stopped one pace from Wren, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his body, far enough that she did not feel cornered. You are sure about this? His voice was low, his black eyes searching hers. Because once we start loving you, Ren, we will not stop. Three men loving one woman. That is not an easy road. People will talk. People will judge. I am an Apache girl living with three mountain men on top of a peak that most people are afraid to climb, Ren said. And there was something new in her voice now. A hardness. A strength she had not known she possessed until she needed it. I have been past judgment since the day I was born. I am not afraid of whispers. Silas looked at her, looked long and deep as if he were carving this moment into his bones with the same precision he used to carve wood. Then he nodded. Then I will speak first, he said. I love you. Not because you are beautiful, though you are so beautiful that I forget to breathe every morning when you walk out of that room. Not because you heal, though your hands are closer to magic than anything I have seen in 33 years of living. I love you because from the day you came into this cabin, I knew what this place had been missing for 15 years. It was missing you. Boone stepped to her right side. Green eyes shining with tears he made no attempt to hide. Boone, who was always laughing, was crying, and he wore it without a shred of shame. I never had a family, he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. The orphanage was not a family. This cabin with Silas and Colt, that was my first family. But since you came, Ren, now it is home. You turned a cabin into a home. And I love you for that. Love you because you laugh at my terrible jokes. Love you because you held my hand this afternoon and did not let go. Colt stepped to her left. He did not speak immediately. He raised his hand, that enormous hand, dinner plate wide and scarred from a lifetime of labor and war, and touched her cheek. Gentle, light, like a butterfly landing. I am no good with words, he said. These two talk enough for all three of us. But I want you to know something. Every night when you put your hands on my leg and work that medicine into the old wound, you are not just healing my thigh. You are healing things deeper than that. Things I brought back from the war that I believed would never heal. I love you, Ren Blackwood, and I swear on my life that no one on this earth will harm you while I am still breathing. Ren stood between three men, surrounded, held, tears running down her cheeks but smiling so wide it hurt, and in that moment the virgin Apache girl who had never been touched knew for the first time in her life what it meant to be loved. I have never been kissed, she said. Smaller now, more vulnerable. I do not know how. Then let us teach you, Boone said, the smile returning to his face but gentler, now tender, in a way that made it entirely new. Silas kissed her first. He bent down, far down because she barely reached his shoulder, and placed his lips on hers. Slow, soft, as if she were porcelain that he was terrified of breaking. The kiss was only lips touching, lips, nothing more. But Ren felt lightning strike through her body, from mouth to throat to chest to stomach, to the soles of her bare feet on the cold wooden floor. She gasped against his mouth, and Silas absorbed the sound the way the earth absorbs rain. Boone was second. His kiss was different, warmer, playful, his lips curving into a smile even as they pressed against hers. He put his hand on her waist and drew her closer, easy and natural as breathing, and kissed her as if he had been waiting his entire life for exactly this. Ren found herself laughing into the kiss, and that laughing while being kissed was something she had not known was possible. Colt was last. He drew her gently to her feet, and she had to tilt her head far back to look up at him. He was so large that she felt swallowed by his shadow. For one moment, the old fear spiked through her, ancient and instinctive, the fear of something so much bigger that it could destroy you without meaning to. But then his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a tenderness that dissolved fear the way spring sun dissolves snow, and he kissed her. His kiss was different from both of the others. Deeper, more careful, as if he was afraid of his own strength, afraid of what would happen if he stopped, holding himself in check. The gentleness was not effortless. It was chosen deliberately with every ounce of discipline he possessed. And Ren understood that this restraint was its own kind of love. The love of a powerful man who would rather suffer than cause suffering. It is all right, she whispered against his lips. I am not glass. Colt made a sound, low, from deep in his chest, and he kissed her deeper, stronger, but still careful, still controlled. And Ren felt her knees dissolve. Colt said nothing, gave nothing but one morning. Ren found a wildflower on her windowsill still wet with dew, And when she looked at Colt, he was staring very intently at the wall, as if the grain of the wood had suddenly become fascinating. But spring also brought the world back to their door. Snowmelt and warming temperatures brought sickness to Copper Ridge. The town's only doctor, old Doc Brennan, was 70 and drunk most of the time. When Martha Pruitt's 6-year-old daughter Ellie spiked a fever that would not break after 3 days, Martha climbed the mountain path in desperation. She arrived at the cabin, breathless and red-faced, looked at 3 enormous men standing behind Wren, with expressions ranging from curious to suspicious, and did not flinch. She was a mother. Mothers did not have time for fear. "I heard there is a medicine girl up here," Martha said. "My Ellie, 6 years old, fever 3 days running. Dr. Brennan says wait, but I am her mother. I know when to wait and when to act. Please come." Wren looked at her men. All 3 nodded. Silas said, "Boone and I will go with you. Colt stays here and watches the cabin." The walk down took 2 hours. When they entered Copper Ridge, every eye in the town turned. 2 enormous mountain men escorting a small Apache girl carrying a medicine bag. Whispers spread like brush fire. Wren did not care. She had a patient. Ellie Pruitt lay on a small bed in the back of the general store, face flushed, crimson eyes, glassy temperature dangerously high. Wren examined her with hands that knew exactly what to look for. Swollen glands, faint rash on the chest and neck, labored breathing, scarlet fever. She had seen this in the settlement. Dangerous but treatable if you caught it in time. Wren worked through the night. Willow bark tea to lower the fever, the natural salicin, acting the way the white man's aspirin would act decades later. Wild peppermint leaves packed against the child's chest to ease breathing. Echinacea root tea to strengthen the tiny body's defenses. She bathed Ellie with warm water, never cold, because Nana had taught her that cold water caused the body to clench and hold heat inside, which was the opposite of what a fever needed. And she sang, softly, in Apache, the healing song that Nana had taught her, the one that had been passed through 5 generations of women who understood that medicine was not only chemicals, but also comfort, not only treatment, but also love. Silas and Boone sat on the porch outside Martha's store all night, keeping watch. Nobody in the town approached. By dawn, the fever broke. Ellie opened her eyes, looked at the brown-skinned woman leaning over her with dark, gentle eyes and said, "Are you an angel, Martha?" Pruitt sobbed into her daughter's hair, and then turned and embraced Wren, pulling the small Apache girl against her chest in a hug so fierce it squeezed the air from Wren's lungs. This was the first time a white woman had ever held her. "Thank you," Martha said. "Thank you, I cannot say it enough. Thank you." Word spread fast. Within a week, 3 more people sought Wren out. An elderly woman crippled by joint swelling, a miner with a festering cut on his arm that Doc Brennan had stitched badly, a pregnant woman suffering from morning sickness so severe she could not keep food down. Wren treated them all. Her reputation built quickly, quietly, undeniably. The Apache medicine girl on the mountain healed better than the drunk town doctor, but reputation has a shadow side. Nash heard. The girl he was hunting was not only living in the cabin of 3 mountain men, she was becoming useful to the town, which meant the town would start protecting her, which meant taking her would become harder. Nash was not pleased. He was also not stupid. Asham. He did not attack the cabin directly. 3 armed mountain men in a fortified position on high ground was a fight even 10 men might lose. Instead, Nash played a longer game. First, he sent men into Copper Ridge to spread rumors. The Apache girl was a witch. Her medicines were dark magic. Anyone who used her remedies would be cursed. Some of the weaker-minded townspeople believed it, especially those who already harbored distrust of native people. Second, he visited Sheriff Dale Hobbs in private. Hobbs was a weak man who owed Nash money from gambling debts, and Nash pressed the leverage hard. "The Apache girl is living with 3 white men. That is a violation of public decency. You are the law here, Dale. Do your job." Hobbs rode up to the cabin on a thin horse on face gray with anxiety. Colt opened the door, and the sheriff had to swallow 3 times before he could speak. "Mr. Weston, I have a, not an order exactly, more of a, Mr. Nash has suggested that the living arrangement—" "Say it plainly," Hobbs Silas said from behind, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Nash wants me to bring the Apache girl to his ranch. Says she belongs to him. Says he has papers." Wren stepped out from behind Colt. She did not hide, did not tremble. She looked directly into the sheriff's eyes and spoke in English so clear that there was no room for misunderstanding. What papers? I am not a slave. I am not livestock. I am a free person born on this land before Nash or any of you arrived here. If Nash has papers, I want to see them. And I want to know who signed them. Hobbs stammered. He had no real papers. Nash had been bluffing. And looking at this small Apache girl standing straight back before three giants, her eyes blazing with a determination that made her look like she was carved from the same stone as the mountain. The sheriff's conscience, the thing he had believed was dead, stirred. I will tell Nash I did not find anyone, Hobbs said, turning his horse. But please be careful. Nash is not a man who gives up. After Hobbs disappeared down the trail, Wren's bravery left her the way tide leaves a shore. She began to shake. Not small tremors, but full body shaking that she could not control, the delayed reaction of a woman who had just stared down the instrument of the man who had burned her home and killed her grandmother. Three pairs of arms wrapped around her simultaneously. Silas from the front, Boone from the right, Colt from the left. Wren pressed her face into Silas's chest and wept while two other men held her upright. He will never touch you, Colt said, voice like steel being drawn from a forge. Never, we are here, Boone whispered. We are always here, and if Nash wants a war, Silas said, then he will have one. Something changed in Wren after the incident with Hobbs, as if confronting Nash's power even indirectly had burned through the last thread connecting her to the frightened girl she had been. She was not afraid of Nash anymore. She was not afraid of whispers. And she was not afraid of herself, the virgin girl with three men who loved her. She became bolder. She reached for Boone's hand without needing a reason. She sat close to Silas while he cooked shoulder pressed against shoulder. She laid her head on Colt's thigh during evening firesides and let him stroke her hair while Boone told stories that made them all laugh. And when April turned to May and the warm spring rains came, Wren went to Silas's room one night. She knocked. He opened the door. Black hair, loose eyes heavy with sleep, chest bare. He filled the doorway the way he filled every doorway, completely. I want to sleep beside you tonight, she said. Her heart was beating so hard she was certain the whole cabin could hear it. Only sleep. I am not ready for more than that, but I want to know what it feels like to be held by someone through the night. Silas studied her for a long moment, checking that she was certain. Then he stepped aside. Come in. That night, Wren lay in Silas's arms. He held her from behind, one massive arm draped across her waist, his breath warm on her hair. She felt his heartbeat against her back. Slow, steady, strong. Like a drum keeping time for the whole world. She felt the heat of his body, enough warmth to replace every blanket in the cabin. She felt the controlled strength in his arm, the knowledge that he could crush her, but chose instead to hold her as gently as he held the tiny wooden birds he carved. Wren cried, not from sadness, from the realization that she was 24 years old, and this was the first time in her life that someone had held her while she slept. 24 years of solitude dissolving in the warmth of this man. I am here, Silas whispered, tightening his arm slightly. Sleep now. I have you. You are safe. She slept. The deepest, most peaceful sleep of her entire life. Over the following night, she rotated. One night with Boone, who held her and talked until she fell asleep and was still holding her hand. When she woke, his face peaceful in sleep in a way it never was when he was awake. One night with Colt, who lay beside her in silence, touching her only lightly, his fingertips tracing her arm, his lips pressing against her forehead, and the discipline it cost him was visible in the set of his jaw, and Wren found that discipline more moving than any declaration. And one night alone, because she needed to remember how to breathe without someone else's heartbeat setting the rhythm. But Wren felt it deep in her bones that she was approaching the edge of something. Her body was waking more powerfully every day. Every kiss, every touch, every night in their arms pushed her closer to wanting more. Wanting everything. Wanting to know the rest of what her body was trying to tell her. Before she could act on that, wanting the world outside intervened again. And this time it came with blood. It was May, late afternoon. Wren was in Copper Ridge treating a miner's wife for chronic back pain. Boone was with her. Silas and Colt had stayed at the cabin. When Wren and Boone returned at dusk, the cabin was wrong. No smoke from the chimney, no lamp lit. The door stood ajar, and the silence was the kind of silence that follows violence. Boone stopped on the trail, one arm blocking Wren like a gate. Every instinct he had developed in 15 years of wilderness life was screaming, wrong. Something is wrong. They entered carefully. Inside, the cabin had been torn apart. Table overturned, chairs broken, supplies scattered across the floor. And on the ground near the fireplace, Silas. His face was bloodied, his hands tied behind his back, one eye swelling shut. He was working at the ropes with his teeth. Nash, Silas said. His voice came out like gravel, scraping stone, each word costing him. He brought 10 men, waited until you two left. They wanted you, he said, looking at Wren. When they could not find you, they took a different prize. Where is Colt? Wren's voice cut the air like a blade. They hit him in the thigh. The bad one. Hit it with a rifle butt until it broke again. Colt went down and 4 of them carried him out. Nash said, Silas paused to spit blood. Nash said he is keeping Colt as a hostage. If you do not come to the ranch within 3 days, he will break Colt's other leg. And he will not stop there. Silence so heavy it had weight. Wren could feel it pressing on her chest. What else, she asked, because she could see in Silas's eyes that there was more. Nash said to tell you that you can end this anytime. Just walk through his door. Be what he wants you to be. And your mountain man goes free. Wren stood in the center of the destroyed cabin. She looked at Silas, beaten and bloody, still fighting the ropes. She looked at Boone, whose face had gone white as the snow that had nearly killed her months ago. And she felt something inside her. Something ancient and primal. Something that had been sleeping in her Apache blood for 1,000 years ignite. Not fear, rage. Pure, clean, burning rage that started in her gut and spread outward until her fingertips tingled with it. 3 days, she said. Good. Nash wants to meet me. He will get his meeting. Wren. No, Boone started. Not the way he thinks, Wren said, cutting him off. Her dark eyes caught the last light coming through the broken window, and in that light she did not look like a frightened girl. She looked like something far older and far more dangerous. I am not surrendering myself. I am going to get Colt back. And Nash is going to regret ever touching my family. She said my family. For the first time. And 2 men looked at her, the small Apache girl with fire in her eyes, and understood that she was no longer the wounded deer they needed to protect. She was a wolf, and someone had just touched her pack. They spent the night planning, not a military assault. 3 against 10 were bad odds even for mountain men. Something smarter. Boone went to town at first light and found Martha Pruitt. Martha, who owed Wren her daughter's life, did not hesitate. Through Martha, Boone reached the other people Wren had healed. The miner's wife, the old woman with joint pain, the pregnant woman. Not many, but each one owed Wren something that could not be repaid with money. Boone did not ask them to fight. He only asked them to witness. If something happens at Nash's ranch, tell the truth to the county judge. Silas, despite cracked ribs that made every breath a small agony, rode to the telegraph office in Copper Ridge and sent an urgent message to Fort Whipple, the nearest federal military outpost. Colt Weston was a veteran. He had served with men at that fort. Silas did not know if they would help, but the attempt cost nothing except hope. And Wren prepared what Nana had called warrior medicine, not poison. Wren had sworn she would never use her healing knowledge to kill. But there were other uses. Valerian root, wild hops flowers, magnolia bark. Combined in the right proportions, they created a sedative powerful enough to drop a horse. She ground the ingredients with a stone mortar that Nana had given her years ago, working by firelight, while Silas and Boone watched with expressions that mixed fear for her safety with awe at her competence. I go into the ranch, Wren said, not because I am surrendering, but because I am the only one Nash will let through the door without suspicion. He wants me. He thinks I am coming out of fear. I will show him exactly what he expects to see. Both men started to object. She raised her hand, a small hand, brown, calloused from grinding herbs and gathering firewood and gripping the reins of a life she was only just beginning to control. But the gesture silenced them both. Trust me, she said, the way I trusted you when I fell on your porch 3 months ago. Silas closed his eyes, opened them. His face, bruised and swollen, settled into the expression of a man accepting a reality he does not like but cannot change. All right, but if there is any sign at all that you are in danger, we come in. No waiting, no plan, just in, agreed, Wren said. Then she kissed Silas firmly, tasting blood from his split lip and not caring. She kissed Boone warm and lingering, memorizing the feel of his mouth against hers. And there was Colt, lying on straw, right leg splinted crudely with rough planks, face bruised purple and yellow, but his gray eyes still sharp, still alive, still him. When he saw Wren, his face went through 5 emotions in 2 seconds: relief, fear, anger, love, and something that looked like anguish at seeing her in this place. Wren, his voice came out raw and cracked. "You should not have come." She knelt beside him. Her hands moved to his leg, checking, assessing. The break was bad. Same place as the old wound. Unique any every time he breathed. But survivable. She hid a small packet of the sedative under the straw near his good hand. "Tonight," she whispered, "wait for me." She returned to the main house and accepted Nash's dinner invitation because that was the opportunity she needed. Nash laid out a feast in the dining room. Candles, silver, wine. He sat across from her and talked about his wealth, his land, his power, his plans for the territory. He looked at her body the way a man looks at property he intends to acquire, and Wren smiled and nodded while inside she burned. Nash drank. Wren raised her glass to her lips but did not swallow. Every time Nash looked away, she poured wine into the napkin on her lap. Nash grew looser, sloppier, his eyes glazing. And into his glass, during one of his long, self-congratulatory monologues about the cattle market, Wren's small fingers released a measure of the sedative so fine that it dissolved without color or taste. When Nash was drunk enough and drugged enough to stop paying attention, Wren acted. She offered to bring water to the guards as a gesture of hospitality. Nash laughed at her generosity, called her a good girl, and waved her off. She carried the water jug already dosed to each guard post. They drank without suspicion. A small Apache girl bringing water. What was threatening about that? 1 hour later, 10 hired men lay unconscious at their posts. Nash was face down on the dining table snoring. Wren lit a signal fire on the barn roof, a small flame visible from the ridge where Silas and Boone were barn-eating. They came fast, through the gate, across the yard, into the barn where Wren was already trying to support Colt's weight, her small arm wrapped around the waist of a man 3 times her size, trying to hold him upright through sheer stubbornness. "She has been ordering me around," Colt said, as Silas rushed to take his weight. "Ordering me, finally. A woman who weighs half of one of my legs, giving me commands." "And you listen," Wren said. "Because you are smart." Boone lifted Colt, one giant carrying another. They moved fast, and out the back gate, up the trail, into the trees before dawn. But halfway up the mountain they met Sheriff Hobbs. He sat on his horse in the middle of the trail, alone, moonlight on his face, gun in his holster. His expression was the expression of a man standing at the edge of his own life, looking down, trying to decide which direction to fall. "I knew you would take this route," Hobbs said. "Nash told me to watch it." 4 people froze. Silas stepped forward, shifting Colt's weight to Boone, his hand moving toward his knife. But Hobbs raised both hands. "Wait, I am not here to stop you." "Then why are you here?" Wren asked, stepping out from behind Silas. Hobbs looked at her, really looked, for a long time, and when he spoke his voice shook in a way that had nothing to do with cold. "My daughter, Alice, 8 years old. This past winter she got the fever. High fever, 3 days, just like the Pruitt girl. Doc Brennan said, wait, Martha Pruitt told me about you, said you could help. But I was afraid. Afraid Nash would find out I went to you, afraid of losing my position. So I did nothing." What happened to Alice? Wren's voice had gone soft. Fever broke on its own after a week. But her ear, the left one, fever damaged the nerve. Alice cannot hear out of her left ear anymore. Hobbs swallowed hard. "Every time I watch my daughter tilt her head to the right to hear people talk, I know it is my fault, because I was too much of a coward to come find you when it mattered." Silence. Wind through the pines. Moonlight on snow that still lingered in the shadows. "I have never refused to treat anyone," Wren said. "Bring Alice to the cabin. I will look at her ear. I make no promises, but I will try." Hobbs looked at her. The girl he had nearly delivered to Nash. The girl whose people Nash had burned out of their home. And the last wall of his cowardice collapsed. He dismounted, led his horse to the side of the trail, looked at all 4 of them with eyes that were wet in the moonlight. "Go," he said. "I did not see anything tonight, and tomorrow I will bring Alice to your cabin." And the day after that, he added, his voice going harder, firmer. "Like a man rediscovering a spine he had misplaced years ago, I will be speaking with the county judge about Garrett Nash." about everything Nash has done. All of it. Wren took Hobbs' hand, squeezed it. Thank you, Sheriff. Hobbs shook his head. Do not thank me. I am late, far too late. But at least I came. They made it back to the cabin before sunrise. Wren splinted Colt's leg properly this time. Mountain maple wood for the splints, anti-inflammatory herbs packed against the break, and strict orders delivered with an authority that no one in the cabin questioned. You do not move for 2 weeks. I do not care that you are the size of a barn. Sit still. Colt looked up at her from the bed. His face was purple and yellow with bruises, his leg was shattered, and he had spent 2 days as a hostage. But the faint smile that crossed his battered features when she stood over him, hands on hips, eyes fierce, was the most beautiful thing Wren had ever seen. Yes, ma'am, he said, and the way he said it with love and gratitude and a respect so deep it had no bottom, made Wren's heart crack wide open in a way she would never be able to close again, and did not want to. Everyone in the cabin knew what was coming. Nash would wake up. Nash would be furious. Nash would come. But for this one night in the cabin that smelled of pine smoke and medicine and the particular warmth that 4 people generate when they love each other without reservation, Wren sat on the floor between 3 men, her head on Colt's good knee, Boone's hand in her left hand, Silas's arm around her shoulders, and breathed. Just breathed. Tomorrow would bring the storm. But tonight the mountain was quiet, and she was home, and she was loved. And that was enough. That was everything. Nash came on the second day, noon. The sun directly overhead, so there were no shadows to hide in, which was either tactical or coincidental. And with Nash, it was impossible to know which. 8 riders, 2 of his original 10 had disappeared after the night they woke up on the ground with no memory of how they got there, their employer unconscious at the dining table, and his prize captive gone. Those 2 men had packed their belongings before dawn and ridden south and had not stopped riding. They wanted no further part of whatever Garrett Nash was doing on this mountain. The remaining 8 were either more loyal or more stupid, or simply owed Nash too much money to refuse. Nash rode at the front. His face was the color of old brick, flushed with a fury that had been building for 2 days. The sedative had left him with a headache that no amount of whiskey could dull. The humiliation had left him with something worse. He had been outsmarted by a girl, an Apache girl who was supposed to be frightened and obedient and grateful for his attention. Instead, she had walked into his home, sat at his table, smiled at him while she poisoned his wine, and then vanished into the night with his hostage. Garrett Nash had spent 42 years believing that the world arranged itself according to his desires, that money purchased compliance, that power guaranteed possession, that wanting something was the same as deserving it. No one had ever challenged this belief successfully. The few who tried had been broken or bought or buried. This girl had done something worse than challenge him. She had made him look foolish. And men like Garrett Nash would burn the world to ashes before they would accept looking foolish. He stopped his horse 50 yards from the cabin. The 8 men fanned out behind him, all armed, rifles and pistols, enough firepower to reduce the cabin to splinters if it came to that. Apache girl. His voice tore through the mountain air, scattering birds from the nearby pines. Come out here. You think you can make a fool of me. You are nothing. You are nobody. The echo of his shouting rolled across the valley and came back diminished, as if even the mountain was unimpressed. The cabin door opened, but it was not Wren who stepped out first. Silas came through the door like a wall deciding to relocate, 6'5", rifle in his hands but not raised. Not yet. His face, still bruised from the beating 2 days ago, was absolutely calm. The calm of a man who has already decided what he is willing to do and is at peace with it. Boone came next, axe handle resting on his shoulder. No smile. The absence of his smile was more frightening than any scowl could have been, because everyone who had ever met Boone Harlan knew that he was always smiling. And a Boone without a smile was a Boone who had moved past talking and past warning and into the territory where things happen that could not be taken back. Then Wren. She stepped between them, small and straight-backed, her black hair catching the noon light, her dark eyes fixed on Nash with an expression that he had never seen on the face of any person he had tried to intimidate. It was not fear, it was not even anger, though anger was part of it. It was the look of a woman who had found her ground and intended to hold it regardless of what came next. She stood between two giants and she did not look protected. She looked like the reason they were there, the center around which everything else organized itself. The heart of something that Nash, for all his wealth and power and cruelty, had never possessed and could never buy. But Nash was not looking at Wren, or rather he was no longer looking only at Wren, because behind the cabin coming up the forest trail from the direction of Copper Ridge, more people were arriving. Martha Pruitt appeared first. 60 years old, iron gray hair pulled back wearing her store apron as if she had walked straight from behind the counter without bothering to change. Her face said she had better things to do than stand on a mountainside confronting a bully, but here she was anyway because some debts matter more than convenience. Behind Martha came the miner's wife, thin and tired looking but standing straight. The old woman with the swollen joints walking with a cane but walking. Two more women Wren had treated. A farmer whose son had been burning with infection until Wren lanced it and packed it with herbs that drew the poison out. The pregnant woman now visibly round one hand on her belly, as if reminding everyone present that the life inside her existed because Wren had eased the sickness that was starving them both. 12 people from Copper Ridge, not fighters, not armed, but present, standing on the slope behind the cabin like a jury that had already reached its verdict and was simply waiting for the defendant to understand. And behind them coming last, because his horse was old and slow, and because he had spent the entire ride composing in his head the speech he would need to give Sheriff Dale Hobbs. But not the Hobbs that Nash knew. Not the weak-chinned, gambling, addicted, pocket-dwelling Hobbs who said, "Yes, sir," and looked at his boots and did whatever Nash told him to do. This Hobbs sat straighter in his saddle. His badge, which he usually wore dull and half hidden under his coat, was pinned prominently on his chest and polished to a shine that caught the sunlight. And riding beside Hobbs was a man in a blue military uniform. Captain James Webb, United States Army, stationed at Fort Whipple. A lean man with a cavalry mustache and the posture of someone who had spent 20 years following regulations and enforcing them on others. He had received Silas's telegram. He had looked up Colt Weston's service record, and he had ridden through the night because soldiers did not leave their brothers in the hands of men like Garrett Nash. Nash looked at the cabin, looked at 3 mountain men and 1 small Apache girl, looked at 12 townspeople standing witness, looked at the sheriff who was supposed to be his property, looked at the army officer whose presence meant that this had escalated beyond local politics into federal territory. His hired men looked too, and one by one rifles lowered, not because they had been ordered to stand down, but because even men of limited intelligence could recognize when a situation had turned irreversibly against them. Garrett Nash Hobbs said, his voice still had a tremor in it, but this time the tremor came from determination rather than fear, and the difference was audible to everyone present. "I have a warrant from the county judge. Charges of kidnapping, aggravated assault, destruction of tribal property, threatening and intimidation. You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Nash, and I strongly suggest you exercise it because I personally am tired of hearing you talk." The last sentence was not in any legal handbook. Hobbs said it anyway. 12 years of swallowed dignity came out in those words, and if his voice cracked slightly at the end, nobody held it against him. Nash stared at Wren. His eyes, which had always been cold and calculating, now held something she had not seen in them before. Confusion, genuine confusion. As if the world had suddenly started operating according to rules he had never learned. "You cannot do this," he said, not shouting now. His voice had gone quiet in the way that fire goes quiet just before it goes out. "You are just a—" "I am Wren Blackwood," she said. Her voice carried across the clearing with the clarity of a bell struck once in still air. "Granddaughter of Nana, healer of Copper Ridge, and the woman you made a very serious mistake in threatening." She paused, looked at the crowd behind her, looked back at Nash. "I am not your property. I am not anyone's property. And these people," she gestured at the townspeople and the 3 men flanking her and the sheriff and the soldier, "these people know exactly what you have done. All of it." Nash opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But for the first time in 42 years, Garrett Nash had nothing to say. The machinery of intimidation that had always worked the money, the threats, the charm that covered cruelty, like silk covers a knife, none of it functioned here. Not against this girl who should have been easy prey and turned out to be anything but. Captain Webb dismounted and walked toward Nash's horse with the unhurried pace of a man who had performed arrests before and found them tedious. "Mr. Nash, I am going to ask you to dismount and surrender your weapons. You can do this cooperatively or you can do it the other way. The other way involves my men who are positioned on the ridge behind you and have been there since dawn. I prefer cooperative. It involves less paperwork." Nash looked over his shoulder. On the ridge above the trail, barely visible among the pines, sunlight glinted off rifle barrels. Webb had not come alone. He had brought a squad. The fight went out of Nash the way air goes out of a punctured bellows. His shoulders dropped, his chin lowered. He dismounted with the mechanical movements of a man whose body was obeying while his mind was still refusing to accept what was happening. They cuffed him with iron shackles that Hobbs produced from his saddlebag. The 8 hired men were disarmed and released with the warning that their names had been recorded and that future employment by Garrett Nash would be viewed by the county as accessory to criminal behavior. As Hobbs led Nash's horse down the trail, Nash turned in the saddle and looked back at the cabin one more time. At Wren standing small and straight between her 3 giants. His expression was the expression of a man looking at the thing that destroyed him and not understanding how something so small could have so much power. Wren met his gaze and did not blink, did not gloat, did not smile. She simply stood and watched him go, and when he finally disappeared below the tree line, she exhaled a breath she had been holding in one form or another since the night she ran through the blizzard with her grandmother's medicine bag on her back and her grandmother's last words in her ears. "Go up, child, climb high." She had climbed, and she had found what was waiting at the top. Behind her, Colt's voice came through the cabin's open window. He had watched everything from the bed where Wren had ordered him to remain. His tone was thick with emotion. "Did we win?" Boone laughed, the sound exploding out of him like something that had been trapped too long. "Yeah, Colt, we won. Your woman just brought down the most powerful man in the territory using nothing but plant medicine and courage, and I am never going to recover from how magnificent that was." Wren turned to face the cabin. Silas was looking at her the way he looked at sunrises, as if the world had just proven it was worth waking up for. Boone was grinning so wide his face barely contained it, and through the window, Colt's gray eyes, bruised and battered, but burning with a fierce light, met hers. "I believe Wren said walking toward the door, walking toward her men, walking toward the rest of her life, that I owe someone a third kiss." The weeks after Nash's arrest settled over the mountain like a blessing. For the first time since Wren had arrived at the cabin, there was no threat hanging in the air, no shadow on the horizon, no reason to look over a shoulder or listen for hoofbeats. The absence of fear, it turned out, was not merely the removal of something bad. It was the addition of something good, a lightness, a freedom, room to breathe that Wren had never experienced, and that she spent the first several days simply marveling at the way a person who has lived underground their entire life might marvel at open sky. She used that freedom for the things she had been wanting. She went to Silas first. A warm evening in early June, mountain laurel blooming outside the window. She walked into his room and said the words she had been carrying for weeks. "I am ready. Teach me." Silas treated her first night the way he treated a masterwork of carpentry, with patience, with precision, with absolute devotion to getting every detail right. He spent what felt like hours simply touching her, simply kissing her, simply listening to the way she breathed and watching the way she moved and learning with the same meticulous attention he brought to woodwork exactly what made her sigh, what made her gap, what made her arch toward him instead of pulling away. When she was ready for more, he held her gently, his patience unwavering. She closed her eyes and let herself be held, truly held for the first time in her life. And something in her, something that had been locked away for 24 years, finally quietly opened. Afterward, he held her against his chest, and she listened to his heartbeat and felt herself becoming a different person. Not a new person. The person she had always been underneath the rules and the isolation and the years of being told that she existed to serve others and never herself. This was Wren without walls, Wren as she was meant to be, and she fit against Silas's body as if the shape of her had been carved specifically for the shape of him. 2 nights later, she went to Boone. With Boone, everything was warmth and laughter. He held her through the night, talking until she fell asleep, filling the silence with stories that made her smile even in the dark. She learned that love did not always require solemnity, that closeness could be joyful. He told her she was a miracle and meant every word. Colt had to wait. His leg needed time. But when the bone had knit enough for him to move without grimacing, Wren came to him on a night when the moon was full and the mountain was silver. With Colt, everything carried a different weight. He was the largest of the three, the strongest, the most physically imposing, and the most gentle. His hands shook slightly when he reached for her, those enormous scarred hands that had built fences and carved wood and once warmed a fallen bird back to life. She took them and pressed them to her face. "I know what these hands are," she said. "I have always known." He held her through the night without a word, and his silence said more than any declaration could. Three men, three ways of loving, three different languages of touch that spoke the same meaning. And Wren Blackwood, the virgin Apache girl, who had been told since childhood that she belonged to no one, discovered that belonging was not a cage. It was a choice, and choosing three was not dividing herself into thirds. It was being loved 3 times as much. Summer deepened, the cabin expanded. Silas and Boone spent the long daylight hours building additions. A larger bedroom, a proper workspace for Wren's herbs and medicines, with shelves that Silas carved from mountain maple and windows that faced east to catch the morning light. The cabin that had been a fortress for 3 solitary men was becoming a home for 4 people who had found in each other what none of them had been able to find alone. Wren continued healing Copper Ridge. Her reputation spread to neighboring towns. Women traveled half a day on horseback to have her attend their births, treat their children, advise them on herbal remedies for ailments that Doc Brennan could not fix when he was sober and did not try to fix when he was not. She trained Martha Pruitt in basic wound care and herb preparation so that the town would not be helpless when Wren was on the mountain. Sheriff Hobbs brought Alice to the cabin on a Tuesday morning in late June. The girl was small for 8 with brown hair and pigtails and her father's anxious eyes. She tilted her head to the right when Wren spoke to her, angling her good ear forward. The left ear was silent, had been silent since the fever. Wren examined her carefully. The nerve damage was real. She could not reverse it entirely. But she made a warm oil infusion of mullein flowers and garlic, dripped it gently into the damaged ear twice a day for a week, and massaged the area around the ear with a salve that promoted blood flow to damaged tissue. She taught Alice to read lips. She showed her hand signs, some Apache, some that Wren invented on the spot that Alice could use with her father when the world was too noisy for her good ear to sort through. By the end of the month, Alice could hear faint sounds in her left ear, not full hearing. Wren was honest about that. The nerve had been damaged, and damaged nerves healed slowly if they healed at all. But there was something now where there had been nothing, a faint hum of the world coming through, and the look on Hobbs's face when his daughter turned to the left for the first time in 6 months and said, "Papa, I can hear the birds," was worth more than any payment Wren could have asked for. Hobbs became their most loyal ally. He visited the cabin regularly, not as sheriff, but as a father, grateful beyond the capacity of words to express. He kept them informed about Nash's trial, which was proceeding slowly through the territorial court system. He watched the trails for trouble, and he never once in all the years that followed would have wavered in his commitment to the family on the mountain. Nash was convicted in September. Kidnapping, assault, destruction of property belonging to the Apache settlement. The judge, a stern man from Prescott, who had no patience for wealthy men who believed laws applied only to other people, sentenced Nash to 15 years of hard labor. The ranch was broken up, the cattle sold, and a portion of the land, small but significant, was returned to the surviving members of Wren's settlement through the advocacy of Captain Webb and the testimony of Sheriff Hobbs. Wren stood in the courtroom the day the land was returned. She did not speak, did not need to. The judge looked at her once, a long, measuring look, and nodded, as if he understood something about her that did not require explanation. There were 7 survivors from her settlement, 7 people out of 30 who had been there the night Nash's men rode in with torches. They were scattered across the territory, living with other tribes, working on ranches, surviving the way Apache people had always survived, by being tougher than the forces trying to destroy them. When word reached them that land had been returned, that there was a place for them again, 5 of them came back. Wren walked the returned land on the day they arrived, and when her bare feet touched the soil where Nana's lodge had stood, she knelt and pressed her palms flat against the earth and stayed that way for a long time. Silas and Boone and Colt stood at the tree line and watched her and did not approach because some griefs are too sacred for company. When she finally stood, her face was wet, but her eyes were clear. They rebuilt on the returned land smaller than before but real. A settlement, a home, a place where the language and the songs and the knowledge that Nana had spent 75 years preserving could continue. Wren visited them regularly. She was their healer again, as well as Copper Ridge's healer, as well as the woman who came home each evening to a cabin on the mountain where three men waited for her with dinner ready and the fire lit, and love so constant it had become the background hum of her existence, as essential and as unnoticed as her own heartbeat. On a night in October, the first anniversary of her arrival at the cabin, Wren gathered all three men after dinner. The fire was low. The mountain outside was going quiet under autumn frost. "I want to thank you," she said, "all three of you, together." They looked at her, the three of them, and she looked back. No fear, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. They sat together until deep into the night. Four people, one fire, a warmth that came not from the hearth but from something older and truer, the simple, extraordinary fact of being known completely and loved anyway. When she finally slept, curled between the three of them, she felt it for the first time wholeness. Every broken piece found and held together by hands that would spend the rest of their lives refusing to let go. Winter came again, their second winter together. But this time Wren did not arrive at the cabin half dead from cold, with nothing but a medicine bag and terror. This time she sat before the fire in a home that had been expanded to accommodate her life, surrounded by three men who had given her back everything she had lost and things she had never known she was missing. And in the spring that followed, something else. Wren noticed it first because she was a healer, and healers notice changes in the body the way musicians notice changes in pitch. The nausea that came in waves each morning, the tenderness in her breasts, the way certain smells, specifically the elk jerky that Boone loved, suddenly made her stomach revolt. She waited 2 weeks to be certain. Then she told them. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades that had no names. Silas beside her, Boone on the step below carving a piece of antler into a fishhook, Colt in the rocking chair he had built for his bad leg, which only ached now in the worst cold thanks to years of Wren's medicine. "I am going to have a baby," she said. The sunset continued. The birds continued. The world continued its rotation around the sun. But in the small space of that porch, time stopped entirely. Silas went absolutely still. The kind of stillness that came over him only when the world shifted beneath his feet. Completely motionless, every molecule of his attention focused inward, processing. Boone dropped the antler. Colt stopped rocking. Then almost simultaneously, three men began to cry. Not sobbing, not wailing, but tears, real tears, sliding down weathered faces and into beards, and dripping off chins onto shirts that had seen worse stains. Three grown mountain men, each one large enough to wrestle a bear, weeping without a trace of shame, because the woman they loved was carrying a life they had created together. All three of them knelt. On the porch in the last of the sunset light, three giants knelt before one small woman and placed their hands on her belly and whispered promises to the child inside. Promises of safety, promises of love, promises that this child would never know loneliness, never know cruelty, never know what it felt like to be unwanted, because this child would have three fathers who would move mountains for them. Literally, they lived on one. The baby came in spring, a girl, perfect and healthy, dark eyes that could have come from Wren or from Silas or from the deep well of Apache heritage that ran through Wren's blood like an underground river. They named her Hope because that was what she was. More children followed across the years. A boy with Boone's red-brown hair and a laugh that could be heard from the bottom of the mountain. Twins who inherited Colt's size and Wren's stubbornness, a combination that made raising them an exercise in negotiation and endurance. Another girl, quiet and watchful, who sat with Wren in the herb garden from the time she could walk, and who by the time she was 12 could identify every medicinal plant on the mountain by touch alone. No one knew which child belonged to which father. No one asked, because in the cabin on the mountain, the question had no meaning. All three men were father to all five children. All three changed diapers. All three sat up with fevers. All three taught lessons. Silas taught woodworking and patience. Boone taught cooking and joy. Colt taught awareness and the kind of quiet strength that does not need to announce itself. The children grew strong and healthy, knowing only love. Some left to find adventures in the wider world. Others stayed, helping expand the cabin until it resembled a lodge, more than the simple shelter Silas had built as a young man fleeing his father's expectations. Copper Ridge grew too. The railroad came through in the 90s. New people arrived. The old prejudices did not vanish entirely. They never do, but they faded the way old paint fades, still visible, if you looked hard enough, but no longer defining the surface. The family on the mountain became part of the landscape of the town. Wren still delivered babies. Her men still helped after storms. Their children played with town children. And eventually people stopped talking about the unusual arrangement and started talking about the quality of Silas's furniture, which he had begun selling to a store in Prescott, and which was developing a reputation for craftsmanship that bordered on art. Martha Pruitt lived to see 80. She died in her sleep above the general store, which her daughter Ellie, now grown and married, and hearing faintly but hearing in her left ear, had taken over. Martha's funeral was the largest Copper Ridge had ever seen. Wren sat in the front row and wept for the first white woman who had ever embraced her and meant it. Sheriff Hobbs retired at 65. He spent his remaining years on a small piece of land adjacent to the mountain, close enough to visit the cabin regularly, which he did every Sunday for dinner. He never fully forgave himself for the years he spent in Nash's pocket, but he had made his peace with it in the way that flawed men make peace with their flaws. Not by pretending they did not happen, but by spending every day afterward trying to be better. Alice Hobbs became a teacher. She taught children in Copper Ridge for 30 years, and she always paid special attention to the quiet ones, the ones who tilted their heads to hear the ones who needed someone to notice them. She said she learned that from the Apache woman on the mountain. Years turned to decades. Hair that had been black or brown or blonde turned silver and then white. Skin that had been smooth tightened over bones that ached more in the mornings. Steps that had been quick became measured. But inside the cabin that had grown into a home, that had grown into a legacy, 4 people who had found each other in a blizzard continued loving each other with the same intensity they had felt that first night around the fire when 3 men said, "I love you," and 1 woman said all 3. On quiet evenings when the cabin was finally still, when the children and eventually the grandchildren were asleep in their beds, the 4 of them would sit together on the porch and watch the sunset. The same sunset technically that they had watched thousands of times, but it never looked the same twice. Just like their love, same in essence, different in expression, renewed every morning and deepened every night. Any regrets, Silas would ask sometimes. His voice aged and cracked, but still warm. Still the voice that had said, "Good Lord," on a frozen morning, and then bent down and lifted a dying girl off his porch. Not a single one, Wren would always answer. "You 3 are the best thing that ever happened to me." And it was true, every word. Decades later, when the grandchildren asked how it all started, Wren would sit them down on the same bearskin rug where she had once lain half frozen and tell them the story. The blizzard, the cabin, the 3 giants who found a broken girl on their porch and decided without discussion and without hesitation that she was worth saving. She told the story the same way every time, because some stories do not need embellishment. "The truth is remarkable enough. I was running," she would begin. "Running from fire and men on horses and everything I had ever known burning behind me. I ran all night through snow so deep I thought the mountain was trying to swallow me. And when I finally could not run anymore, when my body gave out and the cold was taking me, I fell on the doorstep of 3 men who had no reason to help me and every reason not to. But they opened the door. They carried me inside. They lit a fire and wrapped me in blankets and brought me back from the edge of a death I had already accepted. And then they loved me, all 3 of them, not because I asked, not because I was beautiful or brave or special, but because sometimes the heart knows what it knows, and it does not require explanations or permissions or the approval of people who will never understand." The grandchildren always ask the same question everyone asks sooner or later. But how? How does it work? 3 men and 1 woman. Does that not cause problems? And Wren would smile, the smile of a woman who had answered this question 1,000 times and never tired of it, because the answer was the truest thing she knew. "It works," she would say, "because we decided it would work. Because every single day for 40 years, four people chose each other. Not out of obligation, not out of habit, out of love. The kind of love that says, I see all of you, the broken parts and the beautiful parts and the difficult parts, and I choose all of it. Every morning, without exception. Then she would look out the window at the mountain that had been her home for 4 decades. The pines that she could identify by the sound they made in different winds. The trails she had walked 10,000 times. The garden where she grew the herbs that Nana had taught her about in a different lifetime, in a different world, a world that existed now only in memory and in the songs Wren still sang to the baby she delivered. And if one of the grandchildren, usually the smallest, usually the one most like Wren, in temperament asked, were you scared that first night when you fell on their door? Wren would pull that child close and press her lips to the small warm forehead and say, I was terrified. I was so scared I could not see straight. But I knocked anyway. One knock, barely loud enough to hear. And that knock changed everything. That is all courage is, little one. Not the absence of fear, just the willingness to knock on the door anyway. The child would nod solemnly the way children do when they understand something important, even if they will not fully comprehend it for years. And Wren would hold them and breathe in the scent of their hair and feel grateful so profound it bordered on pain. Because of all the births she had attended in her long career, all the precious lives she had helped bring safely into this world with hands that her grandmother said were made for healing. Her own rebirth had been the most miraculous of all. The virgin bride who came to 3 mountain men in a blizzard, who found in their cabin not just shelter from the storm, but shelter from every storm, who discovered that the heart is not a fixed space with finite capacity, but an expanding thing, a living thing, a thing that grows larger with every person it welcomes in. And on those quiet evenings, when the 4 of them sat together, watching the sun go down behind the mountain that had held them and tested them and ultimately blessed them, Wren would sometimes catch one of her men looking at her with that same expression from the very first days. Reverent, hungry, grateful. The expression of a man who cannot believe his luck and has no intention of wasting it. She would smile back. And in that smile was everything. 40 years of mornings, 40 years of nights, 5 children and a growing number of grandchildren. Thousands of meals cooked by Silas and eaten together at a table that kept getting longer. Thousands of Boone stories, each one funnier or sadder or more outrageous than the last. Thousands of evenings with her head on Colt's chest, listening to his heartbeat, the steadiest sound in her world. All of it started with one knock on a door in a blizzard. One sound so faint the wind should have swallowed it. But 3 men heard it, and they opened the door. And what came through that door changed all of their lives forever. The mountain remembered. Mountains always remember. And if you walk the trail below the cabin on a certain kind of evening, when the light was amber and the wind was gentle and the pines were making that sound they make when the world is exactly as it should be, you might hear something drifting down from above. Not words exactly, something older than words. The sound of 4 voices blended together in laughter that had been refined by decades into something pure and warm and permanent. The sound of people who found each other against all odds and held on. The sound of home.